There's still some people joining, so we'll give them a few minutes, but I did just want to go ahead and sort of start off. For those of you who missed our call last week, we talked last week about remote work and the importance of remote work during these times. And so thank you guys for to those of you who joined that. But if this is your first time joining us, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We just invite you to take a few deep breaths, settle in. We're going to have about a 30-minute conversation. This week's topic is about employment engagement, especially during this difficult time. Given the recent events, employee engagement may be more important now than ever before. And if you'll stay tuned, we'll tell you a little bit about why. Just a little bit of background on us. I'm Robert Fowler. I'm co-founder and CCO of CatalystCreativ, and we are a creative agency focused on branding, marketing, and events using our proprietary method called the 7th Level Engagement Framework. And we use that in all of our work. So just about 7 years ago when we started Catalyst, a bit over 7 years ago, we became a fully remote team from day one. So you heard about that last week, as I mentioned. And if you want to hear that recording and you weren't able to join us last week, get in touch with us. There should be an email address here on the screen, which is coffee@CatalystCreativ, no E at the end.com. So just if you want to hear that recording, let us know and we'll send that over to you. So as I mentioned yesterday, we really decided to do these calls out of necessity. So our team, we really live and breathe engagement every day. We have a book called The 7th Level, which is all about engagement, which was written by our co-founder and CEO, Amanda Slavin, who's actually our panelist and going to be helping us with this conversation today. And you know, when we had our first call, our real hope was that we could turn this into a series. So it's actually going to happen every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern. We're going to be having just some time, 30 minutes, where we can connect together on a few different topics that might be affecting our businesses, the way we work, how we're handling the current situations. So if you'd like to stay in touch, again, just make sure you're in touch with us via email. Next week, I think, will be super helpful to a lot of us. We're going to have our very own Director of Operations, Abby, as well as a CFO from Propeller Industries by the name of Anthony Rosen, who will be joining us next week to answer all your questions about operations, finance, especially with the SBA loans during this time. So definitely join us for that. Awesome. So this week, you really came to learn about employee engagement. So what does that mean? There's going to be a time at the end for questions, but if at any time, feel free to put those into the chat, or if you're dialing in via phone, you can email them to us, and we'll make sure to answer those questions. So engagement is such a buzzword. You know, engagement can be measured by many different things. It could be your clicks on your websites, the opens to your newsletter, likes on your social media. Right now, a lot of engagement is about the productivity of your team, sales, so many things. But engagement is important. We're always consuming. And actually, I was kind of doing a little bit of research for this call, and I came across a quote from Linda Boff from GE. And she said that one of her quotes was talking about in the social context that engagement is the discovery and exchange of shared values and interests. And she was talking about in a social context, but we actually think of engagement that way through everything. So making sure that your values and your interests are aligning with your employees' values and interests while they're at home, and we definitely think that that's really just the 7th level right there. So as I said, we have Amanda on this call. Amanda is our co-founder and CEO, and she is an engagement expert. We a lot of times don't like to call each other experts and want other people to call us that. But Amanda definitely is an expert when it comes to engagement. She has her master's in education and actually wrote her thesis all about engagement in a classroom. And then we've really, since day one, been applying that to all of our work. So Amanda, thank you so much for being with us. And Amanda's actually on maternity leave, so she's come back a few weeks early to be a part of these, and we're really excited to have her here. So I'm just going to ask Amanda a couple questions. It's super casual. Keep your questions coming in the Q&A, and we'll make sure, if we don't get them covered here, we'll make sure to get them covered in our blog post, which you can check out our CatalystCreativ blog too. So Amanda, the first question I would probably ask is, in the age of remote work, which it's so new for so many people, why even is engagement important? And how do you think that CatalystCreativ, would you say, keeps our remote team engaged on a day-to-day basis?
So, and I'm really excited for the Q&A at the end of this conversation. So please engage with this topic and ask any question, any hardball question that you have, because I'm really excited to kind of get hands-on with how to support each of you. But in terms of Catalyst Creative and why engagement is important, I maybe just will take a step back, talk about why engagement is important at all. So the way that we define engagement is the granting of meaningful time and attention, because our time is split between so many things in our lives, from the people that really matter most to us in terms of our family, our friends, our colleagues. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, so you're most likely spending the most time with the people you work with, and also now your children who are with you all the time. But in the fact that we're also getting bombarded all of the time through social media and through ads and through any type of sales tactics, and our time and attention is harder to garner. So engagement is crucial and imperative when it comes to everything. And the 7th level, as Robert was talking about before, is defined as there's 7 distinct levels, and the 7th level of engagement is defined as literate thinking, when your personal values and beliefs align with a message, a brand, a company, a vision, and it's that really deep, meaningful, visceral connection that you have with something bigger than yourself, when you feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself. So when it comes to remote work, this is extremely important because you are alone a lot of the times. You're isolated, you're disconnected. For us, it was easier when we were able to leave our houses. I think it was easier for everyone because we would get that in-person time with meetings and with potential prospects and with our clients. But now, that everything is remote, it's even more important that we recognize how do we create something that makes people feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves, and not just like in their living room or in their kitchen or wherever they could find space for a computer. So for Catalyst Creative, we've done this in a few different ways, and we talked a little bit about this last week, but I will expand on it. So for us, it's extremely important from day one that we really connected with each other as human beings, not just colleagues. And the reason for that is, I saw in previous workplaces that it's really easy to become disengaged, or I'll go through some of the levels later, but frustrated engaged, which is level 3, when you want to engage but you're distracted, when you have things on your mind that aren't necessarily specifically about the work at hand, the job at hand, but maybe you were upset because a colleague spoke to you in a way that made you feel really hurt, or maybe you're upset because something's going on with your partner, or maybe you're upset because you're terrified about coronavirus. These are real things that are affecting your job. It's not necessarily the work at hand, it's all these other things that are impacting you as a person. And when we don't embrace individuals in the workplace as full people, we lose sight of really what's possibly getting in the way of them being their best selves, as well as the best version of themselves as an employee. And so for us, having a check-in weekly is so important, and that check-in, it's really about what's going on in your life, what is happening for you, and we also do check-ins in terms of, even with our meetings, regarding like how are you feeling in terms of this work project. So it's really about how you're feeling, not just about what you're thinking. And in that time period, we also do allow for individuals to share from a scale from 1 to 10, and I did talk about this last week, so I don't want to go too deep into this, but on a scale of 1 to 10, what is your stress level, and then what do you need from the team in order to be able to support you. And the other thing that we do that I think is really interesting that we did not discuss last week is we also have a reaction round. So we have certain meetings that allow for people to share different perspectives. We don't run as a hierarchy. We run as something called a holacracy, which is probably a whole other call because it's a lot of information. But for the audience here to note, it's that every single individual gets an opportunity to share their perspective about what they're feeling around a certain project or task, or again, about how the company can be better. And then we have a reaction round where each person gets to share what they're feeling after the meeting. And what that does is it allows for each individual, no matter who they are, it doesn't have to be just the person that talks the most, which is normally me. I talk a lot, I talk really fast, and it's not really fair to others when you just have a big personality talking all the time. It gives each person the opportunity to share what they're feeling in that moment, and then you could really integrate that information and move forward together as a team, as opposed to just one person assuming that how others are feeling. You're creating a space for people to feel like they are, again, a part of something bigger than themselves, not just isolated in their own thoughts, emotions, feelings, and in their own living.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember in the book when you were talking about clarifying what you've heard, I think that extends way past just, your work colleagues. That's also your partners. I see that I can see the attendees. We've got a couple teachers that are on the line. So really asking your students to make sure, or your customers or your team members, if you're a manager, to really say like, do you understand what I meant? Because it is so hard when you can't see someone's body language. That's why at Catalyst, we try to do as many video calls as we can. We try to avoid dial-ins only because sometimes it really helps. It helps people talking over each other, but it also really helps for people to be able to look and kind of see someone's body language or how they're expressing something, or if they seem frustrated or if they seem sad. So especially for some of the teachers I know that are sort of starting to deal with this in engagement, it's very easy to kind of tap an ADD kid on their shoulder when you can be in the room with them and kind of help them refocus. But I think that maybe, Amanda, if you want to give us a couple tips, if you have any, that while everyone's remote, if you had any tips to make sure there's no misunderstandings when a lot of the communication is over the phone. Because as we've seen from a lot of stats, like people are just now starting to use Zoom. A lot of people are still stuck on calls or really not even knowing how to communicate in general. And a lot of it has just been over email. So do you have any tips to make sure that there's no misunderstandings, which will then help lead to higher levels of engagement?
Sure. And for the teachers, I think everyone now realizes that you should be paid $1 billion each. So thank you for just doing what you do. And I think all of us now are realizing how important, teaching again, garnering the attention of someone, educating them around what we're doing and how we're doing it and why we're doing it, to our customers, again, cutting through the noise, to us, again, at Catalyst, it's, teaching is at the highest level of engagement in terms of even marketing. You're selling something in a way that's making people feel connected to why you're selling it, not just what you're selling. So just wanted to say that little tidbit. In terms of a tip regarding having people understand what you mean. So I'm very sensitive, and again, I can really misconstrue tone, and I can personally feel like if someone, I'm also, I would say, fairly intuitive and have a fairly high EQ. Maybe it's a little too high because that's why I'm so sensitive. But I can really misconstrue people's tone. I can misconstrue, why people are, perhaps, again, I will feel that they're distracted for a certain reason, but they're not actually distracted for that reason. And so as we break down these levels, as I said, the 7th level is literate thinking. But the lower levels are actually really important in terms of building a foundation with communicating with your team. And level 1 is disengagement, which is when someone is avoiding or idle from a task at hand. And generally, that's when they're not answering your emails, or they're not responding to your Slack messages, which is a problem in itself. But level 2 is unsystematic engagement, which Robert was really kind of talking about. And that's when you're confused by the messaging. And my 96-year-old grandma read the book and actually used this level to talk to her family, her daughter, on why she wasn't a good daughter and wasn't listening to her all of the time, and didn't understand what my grandma was saying. And that's a very interesting take on this level, but it's really, really, really important to be able to not only speak in a way that someone understands, but for someone to receive that information, because communication is not just you speaking to speak, it's for someone to get what you're saying. So a few different things to do as a leader when you're speaking is to not use the phrase, does that make sense? That really puts the individual, or this is really anyone, but particularly as leaders and as managers, I think that oftentimes when we're speaking to individuals on the team, they can feel, like, okay, they have to say, yes, it makes sense. It's really kind of putting the ownership on them, where, okay, if it doesn't make sense, then they're inferior. As opposed to if you put it on yourself and say, did I explain this clearly? Am I speaking too quickly? Or, pausing every few sections and saying, hey, does anyone have any questions for me specifically? Because I feel like this might be confusing. So giving them an opportunity to be able to kind of poke holes in your communication, and bettering yourself through that process. The second thing is to repeat what you heard. So when you hear someone say something, actually repeat what you thought you heard them say. So say, hey, I heard you say this, and then that individual can fix, or correct whatever they feel you might not have understood within that section. And the other thing is to take copious notes, particularly if it is phone calls or even video calls, and send it after to your clients, to your colleagues, to your partner and husband or wife, but to really be able to show, this is what, again, I've heard, this is the recap, and this seems so like, okay, of course we're going to do that, but it is imperative that you then say to the individual by email, If you have any changes, please let me know, and give them the space then and there to be able to make updates and edits so that you can then have a clear, concise foundation to be able to build off of, because we so often misunderstand each other, but we think we've understood each other. And when you're in a remote workplace, you can't actually see the confusion on people's faces. So it's just, just an extra step that I think will solve a lot of miscommunication problems.
I love that. My partner is going to have some emails coming his way after conversations. I'm just kidding. So last week we talked a lot about limiting distractions. So basically level 3. So I want to hear your tips for that. But I think about there's kids barking. I've been telling my godson that he has to stop running through the house. Kids barking, dogs barking. Yes, it's sometimes kids. But yeah, we're all working, especially in New York, in really small apartments, multiple people on calls. So I'm curious about how we limit the distractions while we're confined in our house, because I would assume, and maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong, that limited distractions will lead to higher productivity, which is higher levels of engagement. But I think in the book you said something along the lines of that most employees are kept at a level 3. And I was just curious, like, what you meant by that, as well as, the huge sort of looming distraction right now is this whole pandemic. So how can employees and managers keep their teams productive at a time when one of the biggest distractions is a world event like this? So taking away the barking dog and the screaming kids, like, we all have this stress and worry of the whole pandemic and coronavirus. So how do you sort of, any tips for sort of moving people up through the levels of engagement and not keeping them at level 3? And then again, if you could just say what you meant by everyone sort of being stuck at level 3.
Sure. So yes. So as I mentioned, 1, disengagement, avoiding or idle from a task at hand. 2, unsystematic engagement, confused by the messaging. 3, frustrated engagement, when you want to engage with something, but you are distracted. And remote work obviously creates a lot of distractions, as Robert mentioned. In terms of, some distractions we cannot control, like, a barking dog, if you will, and a barking child. But, I think what is important to think about is, particularly with children, is if you can, creating some type of space. I mean, we have a 10-week-old who obviously is somewhat of a distraction, a wonderful, lovely, amazing distraction, but there needs to be, separation between baby and work, or even dog and work if you can. And by separation, I really even just mean, like, if there's a child and let's say it's dinner time, don't have your phone at the dinner table, or every single time you have a call, just leave that space that's kind of a sacred space for your family, or create a sacred space for your family within your actual work environment, where you say, like, okay, this is work and this is not work, even if it's just a corner. Because what happens with children particularly is they don't really understand, you're there, but you're not there, and they don't really understand that. So I know this is easier said than done, because some of us, we don't have a partner that can help, or help that can help, and we're really kind of by ourselves with our children. But even giving them, again, a space where you say, okay, children are actually unbelievable at being able to entertain themselves. This is your space. This is play space. This is workspace. And at workspace, this is what happens. And at play space, this is what happens. So when it comes to frustrated engagement, it's all around boundaries. And again, this is a little bit harder with the dog, but we have a citronella dog barking collar. That was the only way that we get our dog to stop barking on calls, or we'd have to put him in a separate room in order to be able to just focus. Again, a dog can't really listen the way children can, or maybe children probably won't listen either, but it's all around, again, boundaries and creating that sacred space for yourself as well as for the people that you care about in your life. Now, for coronavirus, this is around boundaries with ourselves. So, and this is, I think, again, in terms of just regarding frustrated engagement, the reason why so many people are at this level are because the world is a frustrated, engaged place. We're constantly, again, bombarded with so much information. So it is imperative to be able to create these boundaries for yourself. So what that means is I would actually even put a timer on. For me, I use the iPhone setting where it's, it shuts off my apps at a certain hour. But I would put a timer on with how long you are looking at the news and how long you're on social media. Because what's happening is it's so easy to just get completely consumed by the media, and really negative media as well. And it's important to be informed, but I think what's ending up happening is that we're escaping from our current realities by just, diving into some of the most negative media that we could find. And there's there's no real, again, separation between that and your job. So put timers on. Actually, also, if you can, literally put your phone and shut all of your social media off, at least for, again, a certain period of time. Maybe it's like an hour a day, and just say, like, for an hour, I'm not going to be looking at my social media. I'm not going to be looking at the news. I mean, that seems like it's a short period of time, but it's probably long when you actually start to think about how much you're spending on these different platforms. And the other thing, again, is create boundaries with your colleagues. So we do have set working times, which is really important. And, you know, within our calendars, we have different, you know, blocks for those working times. So essentially it's 10 to 6. After 6 o'clock, you could work yourself to oblivion. You know, you could just keep working and working and working, especially if you're home and you also like what you do. So you have to shut off in order for you to be effective the next day. The reason why I say this is I've learned this the hard way. You know, I've kind of worked my way into exhaustion, and it's not sustainable. So set those times. And then after that time, again, it's 6 o'clock, you are no longer on your phone, or whatever time you decide. You are no longer on your computer. Your workspace is now closed, and you are in this physical space of your own home that is, again, the sacred space with you and your family. So it's all around boundaries. Create those boundaries with yourself, with others, with the people you care about, and with the news.
Awesome. I love that. So I think that in your book, you suggest that leaders should be open and vulnerable with their teams. And I think that in a time like this, you know, I've certainly done that with our team. And I think, and it just comes naturally, I think, for a lot of us. But I think there's probably a lot of people who may feel nervous about that. Catalyst, because we've all been together for so many years, we really sort of have fostered that environment where it feels safe and everyone can sort of share. But maybe for people who don't have that, any suggestions for like how to approach leaders or managers or their principal or their superintendent or whatever it is with whoever that person may be, to sort of show a bit of vulnerability and say, you know, people who might not be able to say, you know, like, I'm not comfortable, or I need this, or something. So, you know, and maybe you could offer some tips that you feel we've done at Catalyst to have our team at a higher level of engagement.
Yeah. So, you know, the highest levels, I've already talked about the 7th level. Level 6 is when you're inspiring someone to set goals to make a difference in their life. And that really kind of starts with, in terms of leaders, going first with expressing how they feel. And I think that everyone can be a leader. And I've always kind of felt that, you know, I've done a lot of leadership development, and in these big rooms, I'm always the one to kind of really be very vulnerable and express myself. And the way that I think about it is, it's not necessarily even just about me. It's about maybe someone in the room has to hear my story and then think differently about themselves in the process. So again, I kind of put myself out of it, and make it about the bigger picture. So what I would say to any single person that is really going through something is, you know, rather than even approaching your boss or your manager, or if it isn't a manager or boss, your team, with, okay, this is something that I need, because that's a little bit of a different level. That's more actually level 5, which is when self-regulated interest, when you're doing something that's piquing interest, you're getting excited, what's in it for you. 6 is really, again, about inspiring someone else. So when you're thinking about sharing, if it is even your needs, think about it coming from this place, again, of what is something that you can share from your heart. And I know that might sound a little cliche, but how can you express yourself in a way that would inspire someone else to think differently about themselves, you, and the world? And the way to do that is, again, is by being vulnerable and by really being able to communicate, you know, this is why this is important to me, and this is what's actually happening in my life. I think we've cut ourselves off, even though work and life are so, you know, intertwined these days, and now more than ever, you know, we've cut ourselves off from, again, being these full people in the workplace. And I think it's time now, with our home and work life literally being fused in our faces, for us to express what it feels like to be a person and what we're dealing with in our day-to-day, and the type of support that we need. And it might not be the support that you might not even not know what you need, but being able to say to a team member, hey, I just need to get on a call because I'm upset, or I'm confused, or I'm frustrated, and I just need to talk to you. I need to talk to someone, or I feel isolated and alone, and I'm really, again, I don't really know what to do. Do you have any advice? Starting from there is a much more powerful move than being able to kind of call up and, in this very professional business way, be like, this is what I need and this is why I need it. You know, it's a different connection point. So I would say, be vulnerable, be your full self, express what you're really going through, and allow for others to be able to show up for you and ask for help.
Absolutely. I've got a couple of more questions that I want to go to, but I see that people are starting to put some in the Q&A section. So I want to make sure that we get to those too. So I'll pepper those in. And this sort of ties into someone asked a question. It's saying, any advice for checking in on employees who seem to be having a hard time with the coronavirus? I don't want to intrude, but I also want them to know that I care and that the company wants to help them any way that we can. So any quick suggestion on that?
Yes. So I think, again, this is the opportunity to kind of level out the playing field and have everyone express themselves. So it's not just specific to an individual going through a problem. I think when we try to solve a specific problem with a specific person, that person could maybe be shy or uncomfortable or not want to be able to, you're putting them on the spot. But by having it be more of a regular check-in, or a consistent way of everyone being able to share, you're giving that person, and then maybe other people that were uncomfortable in sharing, the opportunity to be able to express themselves. So again, it can be as simple as, wouldn't call it this, but like it essentially like a coronavirus check-in, or it would be something like, again, with the stress levels, or maybe it's just like every single week you do a happy hour, or on Friday, where you guys just talk and each person goes around and actually just talks about their whole entire week, like what were they feeling, and you have a series of questions that you could even ask each person, like what were you feeling this week, what was your top moment of this week, maybe what was a low point of this week, what was something that distracted you this week. Like you can have a series of questions each week that you're going through for the entire team, and maybe, again, one of the team members says like, oh, nothing really was, I don't really want to talk about it this time. But as you continue to build that muscle, more and more people will want to express themselves. So I would, again, not isolate it to a specific problem with a specific person, and make it more of a consistent way of asking people, not yes or no questions, but questions that would allow for every single person in the team to open up, to be able to build that trusted culture.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that that is so important. And I think that, a lot of people, and I was talking to my brother actually about this, and down in Georgia, and he was saying that a lot of their employees were actually very anti going remote, because for a lot of them, that time is also their social time. So yes, it's work time, but the water cooler talk, like going to lunches with their friends, people that they've worked with for 25 years, and the thought of not seeing them for a couple of weeks or months, whatever it may be, was actually really hard for them. At Catalyst, we've never really had that, because we've always been remote, usually across 3, sometimes 4 time zones. And someone had asked here, were you ever nervous about starting a company with exclusively remote workers?
Yeah, I mean, for us, for Robert and I, we came from jobs that were very much in person and long hours, and there was no real, again, work-life integration. So it was important to be able to create a lifestyle for the individuals that worked for the company that allowed for them to live, and also work. And sometimes that, again, would be being able to pick up your child from school, or go to the gym, or go to the dentist, and not be in a position where you felt uncomfortable asking for that time and space. But it was also very daunting, because it really requires individuals to be good, self-sufficient individuals that are really responsible, take responsibility within their own hands, take initiative, are not necessarily, again, kind of trying to take advantage of the systems and structures at hand. So we really needed to create opportunities for individuals, and also boundaries and structures for individuals to be able to talk about what they needed, but also do their jobs. So for us, it was daunting, it was challenging, but that's why we came up with all of these different tools and tricks. And, like some of those tricks, again, and we talked about this last week too, was sharing our calendars, and, having an opportunity for each of us to be able to book meetings on each other's calendars. Now that's awesome and efficient, but then sometimes what can happen is you can have 10 meetings on your calendar, and then you don't have a chance to eat or function. So then what we started doing was putting blocks on our calendars, in order to be able to, again, have the boundaries that we need in order to be able to do the things that we need, as well as we needed to put our appointments on our calendar. So for our employees to be able to see those appointments. So it's really, for us, it was daunting, but through trial and error over the past 7.5 years, we've learned, what are the pitfalls that can come with the remote workplace, and how can we combat against those issues, because it really is an opportunity for a rewarding, integrative experience, again, for work and life, if you treat it in the right way.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have we have another question from Jenny, and she's talking about how she has some meetings scheduled with external stakeholders in the spring and fall. And outside of these meetings, she doesn't see these stakeholders often. And now the meetings are being moved online. And so her question is, how do you engage stakeholders during Zoom meetings that are about an hour and a half? Also, how do you make sure everyone is engaged? Was there are always those who are more outgoing than others and will not contribute unless called upon? So I would love to take a stab at this to Jenny, and then I'll turn it over to Amanda. So one of the ways that for us, we have tons of meetings that are on calls, and we sort of try to establish at the beginning of the call to say, this is going to be a call, setting the expectations ahead of time. So this is going to be a call that we want every single person that's on this call to participate in. And you can either do it popcorn style or round robin style, where you actually call on people. The other thing that we try to do is we try to ask people to push their computer far enough away from them so that so that it's not a distraction to like get onto Slack, to get onto checking emails or whatever, answering text messages. And that way, if your computer's a little bit farther back, and then also if you feel like you're sort of losing people, and we totally understand that these meetings can start getting really long, is 45 minutes in, say, we're going to take a quick 5-minute bio break. If anyone needs to use the restroom, grab some water, and then we'll come back relaxed and refreshed. And an hour and a half doesn't seem like a huge amount of time, but when people have been home and maybe they just got off of a call before and they're coming straight onto this one, they sometimes need that time. So just setting the expectations ahead of time that there are times that our team has remote working sessions where, it's fine that people are, continuing to work on projects or answering emails or Slack during that time, because it's meant to be a collaborative process. But then there's also times that we just ask everyone to kind of be heads down. So, I mean, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but hopefully that helps, Jenny.
Yeah, just two things. That was wonderful advice, and I would say, again, I keep bringing this up, but I saw that you were added to the call later. A check-in in the beginning for each and every individual to talk about something, so everyone feels heard. I would also have a series of questions that you are asking. I'm not sure how many people are participating in this meeting, so that would be a question that I would have. If it's like 100 people, that's different than if it's 20. But have a series of questions throughout the call that you're actually asking each individual to answer, as Robert said. So, come to the table giving every single person a chance to be able to communicate. And then again, that I am recapping a little bit of stuff we talked about, but that reaction round. So I talked about before having a reaction round. So after you bring something up, have each individual go through and give their reaction. And they can certainly say no reaction, but you're giving them an opportunity to interact with the material at hand. And yeah, as Robert said, push the computer away so then you see their hands, because then you know that they're not necessarily on their phones or on Slack. And I think, again, being able to just, even if you see someone who's distracted, being able to call them and bring them into the conversation and say like, hey, what do you think? Or, or again, have I explained this clearly to you? Or do you have any questions? Just interact as much as possible, but having those specific questions to ask them is imperative, because then it gives every single person an opportunity to answer questions as opposed to being put on the spot.
Awesome. I love that. Another question is regarding, as a business leader, are there any tactics that you use for in-person meetings that during this time you would suggest not doing? So, now that everyone is pretty much remote, so there may be things that are more super effective in person, but you would recommend not doing or not turning to now?
That's a really, really interesting question. I think that, the one thing that for in-person meetings when we worked with clients and we've engaged with those individuals, because again, we've always been remote. While we've had quarterly retreats every single year where we are in person, but a lot of our clients were always in person. And one thing, this isn't obvious, but for me personally, I would like to limit distractions as much as possible in person. So it was no computers, like put your computers down and be up with a notebook and paper. I think that you could actually, obviously you can't do that in a remote workplace, but what you can do is you can have, different team members with a notebook and a pen. And this is actually an idea that I'm thinking about right now, because that would also really increase their engagement, because they're taking notes by paper, which is, by default, you're actually retaining more information than if you're typing it. So if you are on a call and your hands are far enough back, maybe you have, you say everyone get a notebook out with a pen, even if they're doodling, that's okay. But they're then connected to the material, and then maybe after, you can ask each person to share one of the things that they've learned, from that experience through being able to look at their notes, or have them send a picture of the top, note that they want to share with the team. And so obviously, again, it's with in person, it's don't have your computers, but with being remote, it's have your computers, but maybe give them something extra, to be able to kind of connect to that different version of their brain, which is not necessarily typing or being on Slack or being distracted.
Absolutely. There's a few questions here, talking about, the question is, do you think that the marketplace is going to continue moving towards a work from home operations even after COVID-19 crisis? And then what will 2021 look like, in your opinion, for workers, employees, and business owners? So I'll take a quick stab at that one too. I definitely think people are going to be going more toward remote work. I think that employers are seeing that, office overheads are very expensive to have, the lights on, if you will, and the expensive rents, especially in some larger cities. For Catalyst, what we do is we have the team has WeWork memberships, so that it gives flexibility that we can go into a WeWork in our city if we want to, but if not, we have the flexibility from working from home. But I've talked to a few business leaders. My mentor, in fact, has 4 floors of an office in New York City, and he's actually already seeing if there's a way that he can get rid of some of those floors, or cut the leases a bit early, because he is seeing that his employees are working at the same level of efficiency, if not being more productive, while they're home. And so it may be more, I think that it could go to a thing where, a company may have a floor instead of 4 floors, and everyone have a dedicated desk, sort of, where people can kind of come and go more freely, come in for meetings, conference spaces, and companies possibly setting up their own type of WeWork space where employees can come in when they need help, if they need to speak with the IT department, if they want to have in-person meetings, but that it's not required. Amanda, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, because someone else also said, what would you recommend if people are going to start asking to work remote permanently? And is there such thing as a team being too engaged when they're home? So kind of tackling those 2 questions at once.
Yeah, I think the problem with a mixed use environment where it's part remote, part not remote is, it almost feels like you're watching like a television show when, everyone's in an office and then you're on a computer and they're like kind of talking and interacting with each other while you're, on video. So I think that there does need to be, this is, for the future, but, a new way of approaching that hybrid model, which I can certainly touch upon. But to kind of answer the initial question, I do think that, what's happened even with shopping. So when you look at malls, shopping has had to be more of an experiential opportunity to connect with customers and get them excited about that physical experience, because online is an easier, more accessible experience. So how do you bring people to, kind of commute and leave their home and get out of their pajamas and go into an office? And I think there needs to be creative ways of utilizing office and real estate space. So with that, I think we will probably still have physical spaces, but they will be utilized differently, whether they're for events or, again, more intimate networking experiences, or if it is, employees coming in, it's actually using that space for, to your advantage. So what are those employees doing within that physical space? More of like a retreat or, an all hands. So that's the way that I would think about using the physical, is actually not just having it be kind of a background, but being a part of the experience. And with that hybrid model, I would say that, we will have to get creative. I think that if people, this is what we do talk about in the book, is it's around flexible workspaces and asking people what they need. I think so often as employers, we say like, this is what works for me, so it's going to work for everyone. And that's just not the case, because everyone's different. So by asking individuals, how do you work best? You are giving them an opportunity to reach higher levels of engagement, number one. But number two, let's say the whole entire team is within a physical location and the other person might be in, a remote location. You do have to create different cultural norms. So whether that is, different people, being on computers within your actual office space, depending how big it is, or if it is in one room, and having actual headphones and being able to kind of participate as if they're on a computer. It depends on how many people are remote versus in person, but that weird kind of everyone's in person and 3 people are remote probably isn't the best bet. I think you would need to really create, again, a new cultural norm on, we are creating flex workspaces. We want to be able to, use the physical space, and this is how we're using the physical space by this, and this. And then generally we will allow for you to work from remote in these ways, but it's really going to take going the extra mile to ensure cultural norms, again, boundaries, structure. You're going to have to go, even farther when it comes to structure in order to be able to have flexibility.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think there was a really good question here from Nicole. As we mentioned before, there's lots of distractions at home, and that people are trying to balance work and life and tutoring their kids and all of those types of things. So Nicole's question is, do you have any recommendations to keep engagement without adding additional meetings to the calendar? So we've talked a lot about, check-ins, one-on-ones, team calls, but is there anything that can help with engagement without adding additional meetings?
Hi, Casinas. Yes. Thanks for asking that question. That is a really great question. So I think that there's a way to keep engagement high without all of these video calls. I obviously love video calls, but again, I am a new mom, so it's a lot easier for me to just get on a phone call. And again, then you'll have to kind of create some systems and structures for that phone call, because you can certainly say, like, again, Robert said, everyone will talk over each other. So being able to create, it's all around structures, and it's all around communicating those structures. So I would say for parents, video calls are probably going to be very difficult. So that's the first thing. Or if you are going to do video calls, you can make them fun. I actually saw a friend, she sent me a picture of a video call, and all of the kids were actually on the screen with all of the parents. And obviously that's not sustainable forever. But if you're going to give a video call, then kind of get creative and say, like, today is going to be bring your child to work day, and every child gets to be on Zoom and learn about what we're doing. Again, that's not necessarily something that you could do all of the time, but it's something you could do sometimes to get to do things that are fun. In terms of efficiency and being able to connect with people in a way that's sustainable, I would say using tools like Slack, and I mean, again, email, and obviously, again, just being able to Google Drive. Like, we use Google Drive obsessively, and you could do it in a way that's a little bit more collaborative. So if you have a document that's open in real time, and you ask everyone to come together in real time, then you can actually talk to each other and communicate. And you could say, like, okay, for an hour, we're all going to be on this Google document together. Or on Slack, we have different Slack channels, like, we have an inspiration channel, an article channel, a recipe channel, lots of channels, which can be distracting. But if you're interested and engaged in that information, it's a way to connect with, colleagues that are outside of just, again, the normal workday. And that way you can, again, kind of have those water cooler moments and conversations, but within a more efficient way. But it's all really, I would also ask these individuals, like, what would make it easier for them, and survey them and say, like, this is all new for us, and, like, this is a completely different paradigm shift. Like, what works for you? And they might not know, but maybe then you get on a call with them, a 10-minute call with each of them, and say, like, let's just have a conversation. Like, what does your day look like? Because even though you can set these structures and systems for the whole team, there might be, different individuals that have ideas that they could bring to the table, because they're the ones actually living and breathing it. And you could say, like, these are suggestions that I have. What do you think about that? So the biggest takeaway from this long-winded answer to a short question is, ask your team what they feel is best, give them recommendations that you feel could be beneficial, and ask for their perspectives, and make them feel like a part of the solution, because they probably know more about their problems than you do.
Absolutely. I love someone, it's not really a question, but said that they have colleagues on Zoom who add, like, face and weather emojis to their names as a low stakes way to communicate how they're feeling during that day or meeting. And I love that, because there definitely are people who might not want to share, or if you have a huge group, you can kind of take the temperature from everyone. So I think the last one, this one's been up here for a few minutes and we've missed it. And then we have just a couple things to touch on at the end, but maybe Amanda, in 30 seconds or less, you could tell us, what's your biggest challenge as a CEO working with a remote team?
Well, I think that for me, as I said before, I I'm not really a traditional CEO by any means. Oh, you said 30 seconds. Oh, that's not gonna be a 30-second answer. But I'll try. I'm not a traditional CEO where I really feel that's why we do Holacracy, which is, again, all around self-organization, where, again, different call, different conversation, but it's not a hierarchy where, one person tells everyone what to do. So I've just never really, I'm more of like a teacher and someone that likes to guide and support versus, like, tell what to do. It's to me kind of a waste of time to constantly be telling everyone what they have to do. They should, have, again, the systems in place to be able to figure out what they need to do on their own, and trust those individuals to be able to do that. Obviously there needs to be check-in processes. So for me, I think, again, it's been, I've probably gone a little bit too loosey-goosey with with self-organization, and Robert has done a tremendous job as CCO, really, and Abby, our director of operations, who's talking next week, and really the entire team, in creating these standard operating procedures and structures and systems. And sometimes sometimes we really, really live by them, and sometimes we don't. But being able to have those standards and those structures that we are following, it's annoying, to be honest with you. For me, it's super annoying because I am so kind of big and all over the place, but it's so, so important, because if we don't have that, then no one really knows what each other's working on. No one has, any type of control over their day or over their job or over their life. And so while those systems have to be continually reminded and brought up and really held to, again, a higher standard, I think that's been the most difficult thing for me, but the most important thing for us as a company. And that would be the advice that I would give, is let the team create the structures and systems that they need in order to be successful.
For sure. So one thing that I really want to leave everyone is, like, self-care is so important. Giving yourself some grace during these times, it's super, super, super important. We are all experiencing so many challenges of working from home. There's financial hardships, there's layoffs, there's SBA packages that we're all trying to apply for, and the website keeps crashing. There's employee engagement. There's so many things, and we're all going through these together. So it's okay. We have a blog, and we're going to be answering some of the questions that we didn't get to in that blog. So keep a lookout for that. Anyone who has submitted their name via email will be receiving the links to those blogs. If you're on the phone, there's quite a few people that are on the phone, so feel free to email us. Again, that email address is coffee@CatalystCreativ, no E at the end of creative.com. And just as a reminder, next week's chat, we have our very own Abby, who's going to be who's our director of operations, who's going to be talking about sort of navigating the financial and operational hardships during this time, as well as a super special guest, Anthony Rosen, who's CFO at Propeller Industries, who will talk also about sort of the financial implications. And he works with over 30 startups, and so he's got a lot of information to share about how a lot of his clients are handling that. So we look forward to having you back. Please, again, send us any comments, suggestions, feedback, other topics that you'd like to hear us talk about, and we look forward to speaking to you next Wednesday. Thanks again for being here, and take care of yourself and your family.